All right, without further ado, I want to bring on the great Miles Kampf-Lassin, who was the second person today to tell me about CM Punk's wearing the CTU sweatshirt. Welcome back to the show, Miles.
Thank you. Glad to be here, and glad to get a shout out for our own Chicago-made Punk, one of the great wrestlers of our time, from right here in Chicago, Illinois.
Yes, he was born in Chicago, but he grew up in the suburbs. I now know that I'm not an expert on him, but I'll hold off on that.
I think he maybe lives in Wicker Park now. He definitely represents Chicago everywhere he goes, and much like unions are popular across the board, you look at popularity of organized labor remains despite the many attacks from the political establishment. And I think that is reflected in CM Punk wearing the CTU shirt on Monday Night Raw. Viewership in the millions. He's standing out there rocking the CTU logo on the, this platform, World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, had been run by the very McMahons, a la Linda McMahon, who's now being put in charge by Trump of our Department of Education with the express directives to destroy the department and get rid of public education in America. And, she owns the company basically. And here you have CM Punk, one of the biggest stars out there, rocking a teachers union shirt. At the same time, there's these bitter contract negotiations going on. So I think quite a message sent by the punk rock wrestler.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the first thing that you mentioned to me today when you were talking about the general resistance to Donald Trump and to MAGA is coming from unions. And now, by chance, I had seen Sean O'Brien, who is the antipathy of what you were getting at. So we could talk about the contrasting thoughts of some union leadership on this, but why don't you talk about on the sort of the positive aspect first, how unions are responding to Donald Trump? Go ahead.
The first actions we've seen from the Trump administration have been outright attack on the working class of this country. The reason Donald Trump got elected is largely, if you believe polls and exit polls, is because voters were incredibly unhappy about their economic situation, about cost of everyday goods, consumer goods, about inflation. And they wanted somebody who was going to fix it. And Donald Trump has historically gotten very good marks when it comes to the economy. Even voters remember positively his first term, despite the fact that his term, of course, ended with COVID and the shutdown of the economy. Previously, they have positive memories of what the first Trump administration was like for them personally. Of course, that was also the time we saw these massive giveaways to corporations and the rich. But I don't want to give him credit, but Trump didn't go after Social Security and try to privatize it like George Bush famously did when he won a second term, or try to massively cut a lot of entitlements. So voters have had this, and Trump has presented himself as a businessman. That's his whole sale, is that the art of the deal. I know how to make things work. I'm the boss, right? His whole apprentice persona. And so that's what he sold in 2024. He said, look, this guy doesn't know what he's doing about Biden, and that Kamala wasn't able to fix the economy. So he was going to come in and change things. What are we seeing? The exact opposite. Inflation is back on the rise after, continuing to drop precipitously even in the later period of the Biden administration. Now we're seeing inflation tick back up. We're seeing prices of goods, famously eggs, but all kinds of consumer goods going up. And so voters are not happy. And so instead of doing anything to deal with that, what Trump has done is tried to fire the federal workforce. He's put Elon Musk, his second in command billionaire, in charge of basically raiding the federal workforce and trying to cut it down and sell it off for parts. And this is happening alongside his other efforts to just give corporations whatever they want by cutting out all regulations. This is what previously been called regulatory capture, where you have the people who are supposed to be regulated by the industry is supposed to be regulated by government in charge of government so that they can change it to benefit for their own personal gain. And we've just seen this at the highest degree go on. And so, and where's the opposition to this, right? We're seeing a pretty, I would say, ineffective and feckless Democratic Party operating here. And you see that reflected in polls. You know, voters are really unhappy with the polls are starting to show voters really lose faith in Donald Trump and with congressional Republicans. But the only people that are, you know, they have less faith in is the Democrats. The Democrats are underwater. They're in like the 30s, right? Congressional Democrats, because where are they? They're not showing themselves to be an effective opposition party whatsoever. You have Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House. He's saying, you know, our hands are tied. What are we supposed to do? We don't have any power in the government. You think that that's what, you know, Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan were saying under Obama? Like, oh, we can't do anything. No, they were mounting. They were just opposing everything that Democrats did, while also offering an alternative vision. You know, I would say that vision is far right and reactionary and offensive, but they at least were putting forward some ideas. And Democrats, by and large, are not doing that. I would say there's one kind of standout to that. He's not a Democrat, but Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, has been barnstorming across these areas in Nebraska and Iowa, these districts that flip from Biden to Trump, and talking to voters about oligarchy, about the reality of having the super rich in power in our country, and he's getting overflow crowds for it. So I think he's definitely taking on the mantle of real resistance, but Democrats by and large are not. But who is the unions, because unions and organized labor rightly see this, what the Trump administration is doing, as an attack, full-throated attack. And it lines up with what Elon Musk has been up to for years now. He has, you know, lawsuits and court cases trying to overturn the NLRB and actually the entire National Labor Relations Act, which was the core piece of the New Deal that gave labor rights and collective bargaining rights to workers in this country. Elon Musk is opposed to that even existing. And you're seeing that reflected in government policy now, where the Trump administration has fired NLRB officials, EEOC officials, and the way that they've done that is basically to neuter them so that they can't put forth any new rulings, so that the NLRB effectively ceases to function. That's a direct attack on labor law that's going on. They're also, through DOJ, trying to surveil employees of the Department of Labor, and they're firing union members, right, against what their contracts say in terms of retention. And so unions have held these protests, they filed lawsuits, and they were really showing what it looks like to stand up for workers in the face of billionaire rule. And I think that that is a real key informative point of where the pathway towards not just resistance, but offering a credible alternative to the current political order lies.
Yeah, I by the way, to your point about the feckless Democrats, there there was a headline in the Onion. I don't know if I didn't send this to you, but you have to see it to really appreciate it. It's a picture of Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, who are the Democratic leaders of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And the headline in the Onion is, "Democratic leaders stand real still in hopes no one notices them." And I thought that was pretty funny. Shout out Matt for sending that to me. And yeah, I want to stick with labor for a while, but I just have to like second what you're saying. Hakeem Jeffries was in Chicago on a book tour and charging people to see him, and it just, I mean, even Trump. I find myself saying this so many times. It's so ridiculous. Even Trump, who's like the biggest grifter I've ever seen in American politics, who will sell anything at any time, doesn't charge people to see him. You know, I guess, yeah, even Trump. I think Democrats are worse than Trump. So yeah, I don't know. My beloved Democratic Party, Miles, with the exception of Bernie, and Bernie's not even a Democrat. So I guess that kind of proves the point.
Well, and Hakeem Jeffries, we'll just say, like, what has he done? He worked to, you know, stop Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from getting a high-ranking committeeship, right? And instead put Jerry Connolly, this guy in his 70s, in charge, who we can just say is not the most telegenic on the roster of the Democrats, in order to kind of maintain this allegiancy
Yeah.
in the party. And as long as you have this, unless you take a side, well, the billionaires and the corporations know who's buttering their bread right now, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're just trying to fight over these same interests when the vast majority of people have very different interests as workers and as people who work for a paycheck for the living, you're deciding between who you're going to try to represent, you're never going to be able to win. And what Hakeem Jeffries is doing, he called Trump Captain Chaos, right? This is the term he debuted to call Trump. It sounds cool. It sounds like something from the MCU or something, like, you want to be Captain Chaos. This is all the like opposition that these Democrats can muster right now, when it's clear there's a class war going on and they're still deciding which side they're on.
Well, yeah, that's true. And so, from my vantage point, where I read the mainstream and the centrists and the left, the points that you accentuate are not the ones, and this is obvious, but I must say that the mainstream is expressing in their opposition to Trump. There is mainstream opposition to Trump, but it almost always derides what you articulate when you come on the show, or what many of my other guests say when they come on the show. And they go, essentially they're saying, don't listen to Miles. Don't listen to those lefties, okay? And I feel like they hate lefties as much as they don't like what Trump is doing. In fact, I think they hate lefties. They don't really hate Trump. They don't like what he's doing. And it's very frustrating for and I'll give you an example. I'll give you a labor example. And I'd love to hear your reaction. I told you I might bring this up. So I have it on the show, Nicole Cantello from the EPA's union, and talking about the devastating cuts that her members are facing, and the insulting rhetoric and hateful rhetoric of the MAGA movement directed at federal employees. I had Stacey Davis Gates on the show on Monday, and she was standing in solidarity with the federal employees and openly saying that the union has to be the bulwark of the resistance. Okay. So there are voices from the labor movement who are leading the charge. Then there's Sean O'Brien, who's become sort of like a caricature of himself in a really weird way. We've been talking about him for a while, Miles. Teamsters Prez. He was the one who spoke at the Republican convention in July, I think it was, or June, whenever the Republicans had their convention this summer, and in support of, neutrality, officially neutral in the presidential race, but he spoke at the Republican convention and chose a handful of Republicans who have virtually worthless in any battle. So he pumped up their credentials as supporters of labor, even though I can't think of one labor vote they ever made that was any different than the most virulent anti-labor MAGA person. Okay, so he saw a distinction where the visible eye, the naked eye could not see one. All right, anybody else could see one, and then he doubled down. I forget when it was. He made these comments on some talk show, Sunday morning talk show, where he was defending Trump's early days, and even going so far as to say, as long as he doesn't push for a national right to work law, we can live with that. We'll go state by state. I'm like, what union person in the world is talking about state by state? You should be going the other way. You should have a right to work law. You should have a right to unionize law that's nationwide, and you should be fortifying the National Labor Relations Board, as a defender of labor law. And his attitude is, my rank and file likes Trump. They like MAGA. And I don't want to go too far in bashing MAGA. I want to show that I'm open-minded toward MAGA and Trump and even Musk, which is so bizarre. And so you can't force me to say anything that is not going to just go right down the middle. Um, your thoughts on this approach? Your thoughts on one of the biggest unions in America being so wimpy at this time when strength is needed? Go ahead.
Right. I think that this is clearly still an attempt to curry favor. And what O'Brien would probably put forward is that they were able to get Trump to put forward a nominee to lead the Department of Labor who's more friendly to the Teamsters. This is who they were really pushing for, was Lori Chavez DeRaymer, I think is her name. She's the representative from Oregon, Republican. But she got a lot of attention because she had supported the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, in the House, one of the only Republicans to do that. Now, of course, through her confirmation hearings, what you're seeing is that she's completely backing away from that previous support of these ambitious pro-union laws, and she's just basically saying she would allow right to work to continue in states, whereas the PRO Act was explicitly working to overturn right to work, because right to work is a way to kill the union movement, right? To just allow people membership without paying dues, and works. We've seen what happens in Michigan, for example, under Rick Snyder. They put in a right to work law that defanged a lot of the labor movement. Once Democrats won back trifecta control in Michigan, they were able to repeal that law, and that should be a cause of celebration for labor. And yet here you had this supposedly like pro-union Republican in our confirmation hearings, saying that, oh, we can like leave it up to the states. And you're right that Sean O'Brien seemed to go along with that. That is pretty anti-solidaristic, I'd say, because it's not, you're looking out for your own members versus building a larger cohesion of collective worker power, which can actually work to advance the interests of all workers, right? There's no union can operate on its own. And even the Teamsters has been known for, yes, there's plenty of membership that seems to like Trump, but where's the political education to show what Trump's actions are actually doing? Which, as we just went over, I mean, you just look at what he's putting a former Amazon executive in charge of OSHA, right? The agency that's supposed to protect workers, and Sean O'Brien is kind of like giving some backing to that. At the same time, his union is trying to organize Amazon warehouses. And there's just like dissonance going on there, and it's reflective of, this is how if you look at Project 2025, right? This is their Republicans' game plan for this new administration, and it's was cooked up by the Heritage Foundation over many years, this far right think tank. And it was largely the project of Russell Vought, who's now the head of the Office of Management and Budget under Trump. And it's a recipe towards decimating the federal workforce, basically getting rid of the entire administrative apparatus, the very administrative state that's in charge of regulating corporations, of protecting consumers, of distributing tax refunds, all these things, of keeping your food safe, all these things that American public kind of relies on, but maybe doesn't think about day to day. They want to get rid of the whole thing, and that's kind of what's being carried out through Doge. Well, another part of Project 2025 that Russ Vought helped to put together was all these efforts around labor unions, and their big labor proposal is to create, rather than have unions, they want to support workers but without unions, so they want to create these non-union, what they call employee involvement organizations. And they're basically just ways to avoid workers having any actual say or bargaining rights. But what they want to do is go after immigrants, and they want to go after like woke culture and DEI and corporations. Those are their big proposals when it comes towards labor. And that's not going to get any worker a higher level of pay, better conditions on the job, ability to get fair scheduling, any of that crap. It's just going to try to polarize people around these cultural issues. And that seems to be when you're signing up for any type of support for what this administration is doing, like Sean O'Brien seems to be doing, you're basically giving a pass towards that. And that is the exact opposite, I think, of what historically the labor movement has fought for, which is for better rights for workers everywhere, and creating cross-union partnerships in order to take on the super rich who are operating in their own class interests and working for each other because they all want to benefit, right? That doesn't mean they're not like purely individualistic, but it does mean when they're fighting for lower corporate tax rates, when they're fighting for lower just taxes on the rich in general and the ability to put all their money overseas and offshore jobs, they're doing because they see that's going to benefit them as a class. Labor needs to operate in a similar way to fight for people with policies that are going to help all workers, not just help or reflect their own membership. Stuart Hall, the British Marxist thinker, he said politics doesn't reflect majorities, it creates them. You have to work to build that type of solidarity and understanding of like you're fighting for everyone while you're fighting for yourself. It's not me, it's us. There has to be a bigger goal rather than just trying to get your own. That's the only way to fight back against the type of oligarchy we're seeing in government right now.
Trying to get your own. Yeah. No, I feel that's definitely a recipe for disaster for pretty much everybody. I just want mine. The rest of you can sink. I don't care.